Money can't buy love. It's a mindset, a lesson most of us are taught from early childhood. From fairy tales where a charming prince falls for a girl covered in cinder, to romantic films starring Ryan Gosling. This narrative runs deep in global pop culture. But adult life is far messier than a favorite fairy tale or a rom-com binge. Sure, money can't buy love, but it can buy comfort, safety, a better standard of living, access to healthcare, and stability for the people you love. Money doesn't guarantee love, but it can provide the conditions for it to grow in peace. So what happens when after finding a prince, we still reach for the broke man with a golden heart? After the release of Celine Song's The Materialists, the internet lit up with posts calling it broke man propaganda. As a Ukrainian, obviously not a native English speaker, I first took this term as more of a joke. It felt sharp and clever, but not entirely serious. But as the conversation grew and more people joined in, I realized that the broke man propaganda isn't just a meme. It's become a label for a specific type of romantic narrative. Stories where women abandon financial stability to be with the one. This conversation around the materialists pulled my attention to other films that follow this same pattern, and left me wondering, is this trope a symptom of lingering patriarchal values, or a new reimagining of a classic misalliance? Hi everyone, my name is Alona Shilova and you're watching Femme Fatale's Heels channel, where we talk about women, film and women in film. And in this video, I will be talking about the broke man propaganda narrative and how it's depicted in our culture and what it says about love, money and power, and ultimately, what this narrative reveals about how society still ties a woman's worth to how much she's willing to give up for love. This is actually the first video I'm doing with my real voice. Under previous videos where I used an AI modified version, some of you encouraged me to try it myself, so here we are. Let me know in the comments how it sounds. Honestly, I'm just trying to do my best to make great videos and share my view on certain things. So I really want to hear your thoughts on this voiceover and whether you like it or not. As a proud owner of Cultural Studies diploma degree, I am always interested in tracing roots of certain patterns and tropes in film and media. And in my opinion, the broke man propaganda narrative comes from a deeper cultural truth, the romanticization of misalliance, relationships between people of unequal social or economic status. For centuries, literature and cinema have been fascinated by stories of love that defines class boundaries. The noble woman who falls for peasant, the heiress who leaves everything behind for a struggling artist, the successful woman who chooses passion over privilege. These stories often frame love as moral triumph over materialism, but more often than not, they ask women to be the ones who give something up. It's a pattern where sacrifice becomes proof of authenticity, and economic imbalance is rebranded as emotional depth. I mentioned my degree because I think this script was one of those rare examples where my diploma really came in handy. I remembered a seminar with my professor where she and I discussed the medieval concept of amour courtois, I hope I pronounced it correctly, or in English, courtly love. In medieval romance literature from 12th century France, knights would devote themselves to noble women, often of higher status or already married, whom they idolized and served with loyalty. These women were unattainable, and the knight's suffering, submission, and self-sacrifice became the very markers of his love's purity. While there is no true gender flip in modern broke man narratives, the woman is still socially or economically the higher status partner. The emotional logic remains similar. The beloved one is idolized, and the love's sincerity is proven through sacrifice, devotion, and the rejection of material comfort. Speaking about the medieval courtly love tradition, I think it's important to say that these stories rarely end happily. Even when the woman rejected her wealthy husband or social position, the conclusion was often marked by loss or sorrow. In modern films, the dynamic might shift slightly, but the tension between love and social or economic security remains a central theme. And very often, it's still the woman who is expected to give up stability in the name of true love, continuing the long cultural pattern where sacrifice is the ultimate proof of sincerity. Before we move on to the part with the example of broke man propaganda, I want to make a brief disclaimer. The word propaganda is very specific and a serious term. According to the Oxford Dictionary, it refers to ideas or statements that may be false and that are used in order to gain support for a political leader, party, and so on. As a Ukrainian whose country and culture are actively resisting Russian propaganda that aims to erase our independence and identity, using such a heavy word in a lighter or ironic context feels strange to me. And it's not just about Ukraine. In many parts of the world today, propaganda is rising again in dangerous and harmful forms. It's not something to joke about lightly. That said, I will continue using the phrase broke man propaganda in this video because it has become a common use expression in online discourse. But for me personally, it's not equivalent to real propaganda. It's more of a cultural shorthand, an ironic label for a recurring romantic narrative that deserves critical attention. Also, speaking about Russian propaganda, we have a recent video about ballerina assassin in films, so you can check it out. Please also notice that this is a second video on a channel in a row that talks about propaganda. I promise this is not a main theme, it's just a consequence. While researching for this video, I didn't find many lists or articles about broke man propaganda films. Most of them emerged due to the release of The Materialists, but I want to talk about this film later. So in this section, I've tried to highlight some of the most well-known examples of broke man propaganda films and analyze what messages they convey and whether things are really as problematic as they seem. While sitting in a theater and watching Dakota Johnson's character break up with Pedro Pascal and go back to her ex, my friend turned to me and said, "It's The Notebook." In fact, that's the film I see mentioned most often in conversations about The Materialists too. The Notebook, directed by Nick Cassavetes and starring Rachel McAdams and Ryan Gosling, is one of the most famous romantic dramas of the last decades. The film tells the love story of Ellie and Noah, two teenagers from different social classes, who fall in love during a summer romance. After they're separated by her wealthy parents, Ellie eventually moves on and becomes engaged to Lon, a successful, kind, well-off and respectful military officer who clearly loves her and treats her well. But when Ellie gets news from Noah years later, all the old feelings return, and she ends up leaving her fiancé to be with her first love. The film presents this decision as romantic and inevitable, framing their passion and emotional history as more real than the stable, loving relationship Ellie was about to commit to. The problem is that Noah's character, while passionate, is also emotionally volatile and manipulative in ways that many viewers now critique. From threatening to hurt himself if Ellie doesn't agree to go on a date with him, to the way their arguments are portrayed as exciting rather than concerning, the film sends some questionable messages about what real love should look like. Another film that I have seen a lot mentioned in various lists of broke man propaganda is Titanic. Arguably, Titanic is one of the most iconic love stories ever told on screen and is often referenced in conversations about romance in cinema. What makes it especially interesting in the context of broke man propaganda is that at its core lies the theme of misalliance, which I already mentioned earlier. In Titanic, Rose, played by Kate Winslet, and Jack, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, fall in love despite coming from very different social classes. Rose herself feels trapped by her upper-class world, and especially by her controlling fiancé, which fuels her desire to escape not only the arranged marriage, but also the rigid expectations of her social circle. Rose's wealthy fiancé is clearly abusive and controlling, so it's completely understandable that she chooses to leave him. Her decision to break away from this toxic relationship is an important move of autonomy and self-respect. However, the film still romanticizes misalliance by portraying her relationship with Jack, a poor artist, as the ultimate true love and liberation. It suggests that genuine love requires sacrificing material comfort and security, which can oversimplify the real complexities of social inequality and emotional labor. And yes, I know it's a romantic story, not a social drama, but even from a more critical perspective, Rose was born into a wealthy family and is used to a life of relative comfort. Even if Jack had survived, would she truly have been happy with such a drastic change in circumstances? Their tragic ending, Jack's death, only reinforces the idealization and unreality of this kind of love, a courtly love that can be deeply romantic but ends in suffering. With the next example, I'm gonna be honest, I haven't seen it being mentioned in the lists or materials that I have read, but I think in some way it can fit into the broke man propaganda trope, and it's The Devil Wears Prada. The Devil Wears Prada is an interesting example on many levels. In recent years, the film has been reinterpreted in various ways. For example, around 2016, with the rise of the Me Too movement, a popular perspective emerged online that the true villain, the devil of the film, is Nate, the protagonist's boyfriend. The argument was that he did not support Andy in her career journey and wasn't happy with her professional growth. Meanwhile, the character of Miranda Priestly, played by Meryl Streep, became a girl boss icon, successful, calculated, someone who managed to survive and win in the harsh world of fashion and business. The idea of Nate as the main villain was even supported by the actor Adrian Grenier, who played the role. In 2021, in an interview for Entertainment, the actor said,
"I didn't see some of the subtleties and the nuance of this character and what it represented in the film until the wisdom of the masses came online and started to push against the character and throw him under the bus. And I got flack. All those memes that came out were shocking to me. It hadn't occurred to me until I started to really think about it. And perhaps it was because I was as immature as Nate was at the time. And in many ways, he's very selfish and self-involved. It was all about him. He wasn't extending himself to support Andy in her career."
However, a few years later, opinions about The Devil Wears Prada shifted again. I assume this was connected to the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused many people to rethink work ethics and how most offices and workplaces function. This sparked a broader discussion about toxic working environments, and in recent years, Miranda Priestly's character has once again been seen as the villain, demanding, boundary-breaking, and morally and physically crushing people. She has become the embodiment of toxic corporate culture. So, if discussing The Devil Wears Prada from the perspective of broke man propaganda, it's worth returning to the version that sees Nate as the main antagonist. From this angle, Nate embodies the trope of the broke man who resents the woman's success and tries to pull her back into a more traditional or dependent role. His character represents the societal pressure on women to prioritize relationships and domestic stability over career ambitions. Nate's dissatisfaction and lack of support can be seen as a form of emotional manipulation. This dynamic fits into the broader narrative that successful women must choose between love and career, and if they pursue independence, they risk to losing the right partner. In this case, Nate's role highlights how male insecurity and fear, being overshadowed, can become obstacles for women's progress, reinforcing the message that women's ambitions are a threat to personal relationships. However, this argument works only if you see Nate as the villain of the story. For example, I really liked how the authors of Cinema Therapy channel analyzed his relationships with Andy, and I will leave the link to this video in the description below. I think one of the reasons why it might be so hard to talk about the broke man propaganda narrative in terms of analysis and more critical approach is because it's largely present but not really emphasized in the films. Like, look at most Adam Sandler's films. His characters frequently have relationships with beautiful, confident, and put together women who, despite their partner's flaws and immaturity, choose to stay with him. These women are often portrayed as successful or emotionally mature, while the men are imperfect, often irresponsible, and still figuring themselves out. The key element is that the men prove their love through persistence, humor, or moments of vulnerability, and that proof of love becomes the reason the woman stays, overlooking practical or social mismatches. While this dynamic isn't an explicit or direct representation of the broke man propaganda, it shares many of its underlying features. The woman who could be seen as socially or emotionally superior, rather in terms of stability, maturity, or success, remains committed to a so-called man-child. This dynamic is a part of a broader male fantasy repeatedly seen in media, the notion that a woman will choose love and devotion over security or equal standing. It subtly supports the narrative that men don't need to match up materially or socially, as long as they demonstrate emotional authenticity. At the same time, it frames women's choices as an act of sacrifice or forgiveness, which can gloss over the real complexities and power imbalances in relationships. However, I will also say that depiction of relationships where a woman has a higher social or material status than the man doesn't necessarily mean it's broke man propaganda. A great example for me is the film Long Shot with Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen. In this film, Theron's character Charlotte Field is running for president, while Rogen's character Fred is fully in love with her and stands by her side, helping her achieve her goals. The film has many funny moments and discussions about how Charlotte is clearly out of Fred's league.
So we asked 1,000 constituents how they would feel if, say, Princess Di, if she were to start dating Guy Fieri. Or if Jennifer Lawrence were to start dating this potato in a teal windbreaker. Be very upset.
But it's their understanding and shared values that bring them together. In the end, Charlotte doesn't sacrifice her career or goals for Fred. She achieves them with him standing by her side, and that's the main difference. The woman doesn't need to lose her years of hard work, material wealth, or social status for sake of love. She gets to have both, while the man, who never aimed for a higher status, remains himself, losing nothing and not betraying who he is. It feels like since the premiere of Materialists, social media has been flooded with a wide range of opinions. But the one thing is for sure, Materialists provoke multiple interpretations and conversations. After watching the film, my friend and I had a conversation, one very similar to the debates currently flooding social media. My friend shared a point of view I mostly agree with, that love isn't enough to build a healthy relationship. If after nearly 10 years your ex hasn't changed their life and now promising you to do it all for you, it's likely a trap. I, on the other hand, played a little bit the devil's advocate, saying that the love is often irrational, and relationships like the one in the film do exist in real life. To me, both perspectives can be true at the same time. If I had to sum up my thoughts on the Materialists in one sentence, I'd say this: the film will resonate most with those who have had the one that got away, the kind of ex you shared a special connection with, but had to let go because of circumstances bigger than both of you. And that's because the film doesn't dive deep into the details of Lucy and John's relationships. We are not shown how their connection developed or what truly made it so profound. Instead, we are only told the reason they broke up: money, and given a hint of trauma bonding, since both characters come from similarly difficult family backgrounds. So yes, I believe that emotional pull between them will feel most believable to viewers who have had a similar experience themselves. Coming back to the topic of broke man propaganda, The Cosmopolitan article on the same subject by Kyla Kibe really resonated with me. In it, she writes,
"This love is greater than money message is a well-established trope, one that's existed for eons and has appeared in everything from fairy tales and Christmas specials to The Notebook. Hence why some viewers, specifically those calling broke man propaganda on the film, find it rather reductive. Essentially, this critique argues that the movie's moral privileging of true love over financial stability neglects the economic realities women face under patriarchy and reinforces a narrative that encourages women to sacrifice their needs and desires for the sake of some kind of moral purity supposedly preserved by partnering with a man who does not, in fact, meet those needs and desires. In other words, it encourages women to settle."
Still, to be completely honest, I want to say that I don't believe a thoughtful and nuanced director like Celine Song would create a film with that central message that women should settle. I truly think it was intended more as a light, slightly unrealistic, bittersweet drama about choosing love above all else. It's just the timing of the film's release that made the story feel so different. With major crises, wars, and recessions happening around the world, it feels nearly impossible for the most viewers to truly connect with the story or take it seriously. Even if we view the Materialists as the fairy tale, it doesn't satisfy the emotional needs of the audience. In today's reality, Lucy should have ended with Pedro Pascal's character, the man who could save her from the financial burdens of this world. Yes, that would still be a fantasy, but one that feels far more relatable to most people today. And that's why, in my opinion, the Materialists feels more like a male fantasy than anything else. It was especially bizarre to me when at the end of the film Lucy chose to leave her job, even when she was offered as much money as she wanted. Even playing the devil's advocate here, I couldn't understand why, if money was such a problem for their relationship, Lucy couldn't remain the breadwinner. Sure, that would spark a different kind of criticism. She'd essentially be dragging her partner along just to be with him. But this ending, where both characters end up with no jobs, no savings, I assume, and only love, which is already questionable for many viewers, left me with no way to defend this film. Maybe in a different, better world, the Materialists would feel like what it was supposed to be. A sweet love story about human values, but from the perspective of a major economic crisis, the oppression of women and growing instability, this narrative feels too far-fetched to be taken seriously. Also, by the end of this video, I wanted to say if someone wants to comment that the broke women propaganda also exists, I will say right there, respectfully, no. Because even in stories like Cinderella or many of its interpretations, it's more likely a reflection of patriarchal system where women for centuries and frankly still today cannot reach financial stability and success as easily as men do. This is why the broke man propaganda cannot really work in reverse for women. The social and economic realities are very different. While men's worth is often measured by material success and ability to provide, women historically have been denied equal access to wealth and power. So narratives that celebrate a woman choosing a broke man rely on a fantasy rooted in male privilege. It doesn't translate when reversed, because women still face systematic barriers that make financial independence and career success much harder to achieve. Thank you for watching this video. I will be very grateful if you give it a like and leave a comment, since it really helps our channel to grow. I would also love to hear your feedback. What are your thoughts on this topic? Maybe you can share some other examples of films that fall into broke man propaganda narrative. Again, let me know what you think about this voiceover, and is my pronunciation and accent comfortable to listen? Because really, I'm struggling here, I'm fighting for my life, so please at least give a comment for my struggles. And that's all for today, and see you in the next video. Bye!